Okay, I'm very happy to welcome back onto the show after, God, it must be 3 or 4 years now, Paul. Paul Newsome from Swim Smooth. I think I'm happy calling you the world's leading swim coach, Paul. I don't think we
That's
can.
very kind of you, Rob.
Well, I think there's a lot of people out there would agree with me. It's really good of you to come on and join us. I'm really excited because I've been having tons of emails from listeners saying race season's approaching and I'm absolutely terrified of open water. So I thought, who better to go to than the world's leading open water swim instructor and get him on to give us some top tips. So firstly, how are you doing, mate? It's been, like I said, 3 or 4 years, I think, since we've had you on the show now, though I have replayed your interview a couple of times.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a crazy old period, hasn't it, with the pandemic and stuff, and getting people out back out there and in the swimming pools and into the pool, into the ocean and the sea and the rivers and those sort of things. You know, one of the things I want to discuss today is a little bit about how to train in the open water and tips and techniques that you might do for leading up to maybe your first triathlon event or what have you. I think the pandemic was a really interesting period because we were very lucky here in Western Australia, in the sense that they closed all the borders and stuff. And we had, like, I remember there's one incident where one person out of a population of 2.5 million people had COVID and the whole state closed down. It was just absolutely mental. But what it did mean, it meant that we had all these restrictions on what we could and couldn't do. And one of those restrictions was having the pool closed for quite some period of time. And we migrated down to the local river and started to conduct our open water swimming sessions down there at in the Swan River, basically. And it was a fantastic period of time there where I was taking people through, showing them how to actually improve their swimming in the open water. And just, you know, I was looking for a little video clip of it the other day. All the sunrises coming up, and then we had some days where it was raining, and then the rainbow came out and stuff. And it was this such a weird, uncertain time, but it sort of brought everyone together, and it was just a fantastic community spirit and vibe that was going on during that period. So yeah, apart from that, we're bouncing back now. We're back down in the pool, and things are going good. Thanks.
Well, I don't know whether you saw a similar thing down in Australia, but in the UK, post-COVID, one of the things that happened was it seems like people's enthusiasm for the open water swimming aspect has gone tenfold, not just with triathletes, but you know, friends of my son's parents, mums at the school gate saying, oh, we're going to go down to the local swimming lake and go swimming. And it's not necessarily the kind of swimming triathletes would do, but people have almost rediscovered this love of swimming around head up breaststroke in the local lake and how amazing it is to be out swimming in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there are two really good swimming magazines over there in the UK, a brand new one called Swim, and then also Outdoor Swimmer as well. And I was speaking to Simon Griffiths from Outdoor Swimmer. He produced a big advertorial or graphic or something like that. It was that he sent over to me talking about how much open water swimming has just absolutely blossomed through the pandemic, and which is a fantastic thing, right? Because a lot of people spend a lot of their life being afraid to even get in a swimming pool, let alone go out into a river or in the sea or what have you. And, you know, crazy enough, that's very much my background. I mean, I've been swimming competitively since the age of 7, but it took me until I was around about 16 or 17 years of age to consider doing my first triathlon. I did my first one in Driffield in East Yorkshire. It was called the World's Triathlon. I've still got the t-shirt actually, because it looks like World's Triathlon. And I was like, you know, so I was this young 16-year-old kid thinking, I've been to the World's Triathlon. Whereas in actual fact, it was just a local swimming triathlon. But nonetheless, I did my first open water triathlon around about 6 months after that. And I remember being absolutely petrified, even though swimming is my background. I've done it all my life and competed at quite a high level as well. I still have a bit of a phobia of getting out there into the open water sometimes. And we'll discuss some of that, no doubt, today.
Yeah, well, that's the first place to start, I think, isn't it? It's the open water aspect of it adds a whole extra element to just the swimming aspect. So the first thing I want to talk about is a lot of athletes come to me this time of year and say, even some of them who are very competent and fast, strong swimmers, I am extremely anxious about getting into the open water. I know that I'm going to float wearing a wetsuit. You keep telling me that I couldn't possibly swim to the bottom if I tried to. but I'm really, really scared of getting into the open water because my brain freaks out and I don't know what's in the water underneath me. So let's kick off with that. What are some strategies people can use to help like manage that nervousness and anxiety and get to grips with it, maybe even before they get in the water?
Absolutely. I mean, there's quite a few things which would actually trigger that sort of panic response. For me personally, it's deep water. I just hate the thought of actually really, really deep water. If it's cloudy and murky, I'm all right with that. But if it's really crystal clear, ironically enough, and I can gauge how deep it looks, that's what freaks me out quite a bit. The reality is over there in the UK, and reality sometimes gets clouded, obviously, by that panic and anxiety. But the reality is that there's nothing really in the water as over there in the UK and Ireland and around most parts of Europe that can actually hurt you. Over here, where we are in Perth, in Western Australia, there are things in the water which frequently do hurt people and unfortunately do take their lives as well. So it's a very, when I swim over in the UK, and if I come over to Mallorca and for the Best Fest, which is usually every May, June. I've just missed it this year, unfortunately. I wasn't able to get across, but I love swimming over there in the UK and Europe because in my head, immediately I'm telling myself, well, there's actually nothing in here that can actually hurt me. I'm totally fine with that. That being said, I still do recognize that people do get freaked out by it. And, like I said before, for me, that's deep water. The first place to start with any of this is to actually ask yourself, have a real stern question with yourself, what is it that's freaking me out? Is it the deep? Is it the cold? Is it the fact that reeds are wrapping around my legs when I'm walking into the river? Is it the current? Is it swimming around other people? I was speaking with a girl just last week. In fact, I was swimming in the same lane as her. And she's been swimming with the squad a little bit, and we've done a few video analysis sessions with her. And her improvement is just off the charts. And I said, how are you doing? She said, I'm really excited. We're going to the Ironman next week and over in Cairns. And I said, so what do you expect to swim? And she says, well, that's the problem. I'm just not swimming very well in the open water. I said, what do you mean? You look amazing in the pool. She's swimming around about 29 minutes for 2Ks in the pool. So,
Wow.
quicker than 1:30 per 100. And I was genuinely really impressed by how well she's going. And yet she said she still hasn't managed to crack, I think it was 35 or 36 minutes for a half Ironman swim. And I was like, something's going wrong there. So tell me about it. What's wrong? And I just get freaked out with everybody else swimming around me. I said, but you're really powerful and you're strong. And, I wouldn't want to take a knock from you and stuff. And she said, yeah, but, I just clam up, when I'm out there, I just clam up and I hold on to my breath and I start panicking a little bit. And, that's one of the classic things to see people doing is when they do start to panic, they immediately hold on to their breath. They forget about exhaling properly in the water. Their breathing pattern goes out of sync completely. And they just go into a great big old stress, basically. And I would say, if that's ever happened to you, and it has happened to me, it's happened to me on many occasions, I would say one of the first things to do is not be afraid to actually pop your head up and just do a little bit of heads up breaststroke and just calm yourself down, or even flip over onto your back and just breathe, just doing a sort of funny backstroke type of thing, just to actually compose yourself again. Don't ever be afraid to do that. Don't think, I failed if I didn't do freestyle the whole way around the course. A little bit like people think, I failed on the Ironman if I didn't run the whole thing, sort of thing. It's not failing. You've got to go from point A to point B. I don't care how you get there. The point is that you get there, right? So, when you have these anxieties stir up for whatever reason that they might be, it's important just to think to yourself, look, okay, I'm okay. There are support crews around me. I'm probably wearing a wetsuit, which is always going to give you that extra little bit of, warmth and buoyancy as well, and just give you that little bit of security. And that's not to say that, there aren't relative and real dangers out there for everyone. There doesn't have to be things swimming around you for you to be in a situation where you could get into trouble. But I think the most important thing is that when you're practicing and training up for swimming well in the open water is you address things in the pool that can help you out there. So simple, basic things like making sure you remember to blow out and exhale properly in the water. I've just been running a new YouTube series, a 5-part series, in fact, talking about our stroke correction hierarchy. And the crazy thing is that over there in the UK and in many parts of the world, the way freestyle has been taught in terms of actually, okay, what needs to go in what order to actually get the best improvement. There was an acronym called BLABT, So BLABT, and that stands for body, legs, arms, breathing, and then timing. So the idea was that the fourth consideration out of 5 should be your breathing. And I fundamentally disagree with that. If your breathing is not sorted right from the get-go in the pool, and certainly in the open water, you're just going to freak out and have a major issue with that. So I'm a big proponent of practicing your breathing in the pool, and it can be as simple as, I've got a couple of drills which I do called the sink down, basically to try to actually sink down to the bottom of the pool. If you're tense, nervous, and anxious, even if you don't think of yourself as a great swimmer, you'll actually struggle to sink to the bottom of the pool if you're holding onto your breath. So getting good with the exhalation is really quite important. Equally, learning to breathe to both the left and the right hand side. And the on that first video series, we talked a lot about bilateral breathing, and I was heckled by a few online trolls saying, "Oh, bilateral breathing, you don't need to do that." That's not the point. It's not the point of whether or not you need to breathe every 3 strokes. The point is that you feel equally comfortable breathing to either your left or your right hand side. There are many races that I do where I breathe only to my left because I'm on a left hand turn course, or only to my right because I'm on a right hand turn course, or I'll bring in a bit of bilateral breathing because I want to just straighten things out a little bit. So practicing those things in the pool is really important. And then when you get into the open water, you've already ticked off a couple of things. You're breathing out underneath the water, it's keeping you calm and relaxed. You know that you're able to swim a lot straighter, so you're not panicking about swimming maybe 800 meters in a 750 meter swim, or maybe 1,000 meters in a 750 meter swim, because you know you can keep yourself a lot straighter basically as well. So those things are really important to try and address.
One of the interesting things with anxiety is there's an old phrase that feelings are not facts, but feelings affect the facts. So if the facts are that there's nothing in the water that can hurt you, but your feeling is, I'm absolutely terrified that something in the water can hurt me, the anxiety and the physical sort of clenching of your body and the fact you can't breathe properly, that's a very real phenomenon that's created by a story that you've told yourself in your head. So I think you're right to have something that an athlete can go back to, even if it's as simple as focusing on breathing out into the water for 2 or 3 seconds, can really help the athlete calm down. And that in itself takes the feeling of the anxiety away. It's a very funny crossover of the mental and the physical, isn't it?
Oh, totally. I love that saying, by the way. I haven't heard it before, but it's a really good one, Rob. And I think, it definitely echoes a lot of my experiences. I swam around Manhattan Island in 2013, and that's a 48K swim, or 28 and a half miles or something like that. And it was a race, and it was an invitational race. You have to have swum the English Channel to have done it. So I did that in 2011. Went and did this race, and they'd seeded everybody, and they told me that I was in rank 4, so they expected me to finish 4th in this particular race. And they'd had a really unseasonably cold start to the season over there, and it was 14 degrees Celsius in the water. So imagine trying to swim in 14 degrees Celsius for a 48-kilometer swim without any wetsuit on. The first thing I did when I jumped in was I literally couldn't get my breath at all. I was like that. And I was like, oh, starting to go into the whole panic thing. And I just went back to absolute basics. I just, one of the little teaching tools that I use is to get people to say to themselves, bubble, bubble, breathe, bubble, bubble, breathe. So here I am at the biggest race I've ever done in my life, saying to myself, bubble, bubble, breathe, bubble, bubble, breathe. And it just helped to calm me down. And, ultimately I went on to actually win that race, which was amazing for me. And it really just showed me that, sometimes it is about keeping it as simple as possible. And I just use that technique. I just use that technique to really distract myself from, the nervousness that I had about how cold it was, and the fear of what it was going to feel like to swim 48 kilometers. And, you're swimming around Manhattan Island, so you're starting to think, are there any dead bodies underneath me with concrete shoes on or anything like that? That all those sort of things that, there probably wasn't. And I definitely wasn't going to see them, and I didn't see them, but like you said, sometimes that can play into reality, and you can let, sometimes that can really just take over you and become a problem.
I think it's going to help a lot of people to hear you talk about your anxiety and the fact that you're very honest about the fact you experience it still, because I think a very, a very common assumption people have is the people who are really good at this don't feel like me. I'm the only one here who's scared. I'm the only one here who's anxious. So to hear one of like the best open water swimmers in the world say, I totally freak out when I get in the water sometimes, I think we'll give people permission to go, okay, it's not about being a failure and freaking out. It's about learning to deal with those feelings that come up and having a strategy for them.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. You know, I also think it's one of my passions for open water swimming is being able to help other people get into the great outdoors. You know, I spent most of my childhood locked up in a stuffy swimming pool, you know, every weekend competing, and I wasn't a very good sprinter, you know, and when you're a little kid, that's all you got access to is 25, 50 meters. And I'll never forget the first day I had to go properly swimming in the open water. I was actually whitewater rafting with my mum. We call her Mother Smooth. And whitewater rafting in the southwest of France, because we'd gone down there to watch the Tour de France in 2005. So I would have been 16. And I didn't have any goggles with me or anything. I remember she said, well, go on, get in there. Like, it's a nice flat bit of river now. Why don't you just get in there? And my stepdad was with us, and he had a crappy old pair of goggles. And he goes, there you go, put those on and jump in. I was like, I don't want to do it. I daren't do it. I daren't do it. You know, and I mean, I was swimming a lot at that point in time, and I just daren't get in. And I think he actually elbowed me in. I fell into the water sort of thing, and they threw me the goggles, and I just put them on. And I never, ever forget the feeling of just opening up my eyes underneath the water. There's loads of little small smooth pebbles on the bottom of the river, and the river wasn't that deep. It was probably 4 feet deep maximum, something like that. But it was just the feeling of, I was like, oh my God, I've got this massive expanse of water now that I can just go and start swimming. And I never ever looked back from that point onwards. It was just absolutely amazing from there, you know. So yeah, I mean, being able to share that with other people is absolutely amazing, and taking people for swimming sessions, coach sessions in the open water and stuff. I just absolutely love it. And yeah, I just wish I'd actually started it sooner. I mean, you might be listening to this thinking, oh, 16, 17, that's still pretty young. But, you know, I mean, I'd been swimming at that point for 10 years, very seriously for 10 years. And I just never considered going in the open water until that point in time. And then from there, that's what then released me to have a go doing a triathlon for the first time and thinking I could do it. And then from there, getting into marathon swimming as well. And, you know, from this little kid from Bridlington in East Yorkshire who couldn't do sprinting to save his life, you know, I couldn't even make it into the county championships, or certainly not into the final of those things, you know, to then being able to represent the Great Britain in triathlon, and then ultimately go on to winning some big international races for open water swimming. It's a great thing to get into.
Brilliant. So for people listening who are just getting into training in open water for the first time this year, give us some tips for how the triathlete can acclimate to open water swimming and sort of build the confidence in the open water.
I think the first place I'd start with that is the temperature of the water. Most of you are going to be going into the open water wearing a wetsuit. And if you're not, then you know, you may be sort of considering buying one. I think fit of your wetsuit is very, very important indeed. If you get one that's too small or you don't put it on properly, it's going to feel very, very claustrophobic indeed. And that can actually add to the anxiety, especially when you hear that, oh, such and such a wetsuit, so fantastic, it saved so-and-so 5 minutes off their time. And you get in there expecting it to be like this amazing weapon, and you feel all claustrophobic, and it adds to the anxiety when you first try it on. You go, what the hell is everyone talking about? And it's like, ah! And it becomes even worse, basically. But you know, that's where I would start, is just acclimating to the temperature of it. With the wetsuit, even though it's going to keep you warm, there's still that horrible feeling when water trickles in down the back of your neck or down the front of the suit there. So the first thing I would do is actually once I've got my wetsuit on, I'd actually walk into the water. I'd splash my face without my goggles on. I'd actually just feel the water, get used to the breathing sort of thing, tip a little bit of water down the neckline of the suit, which actually helps with how the suit moves as well. It sort of lubricates the body a little bit against the suit. And then when I'd start off, so this would apply whether I'm wearing a wetsuit or not. If it's really, really cold, I'd actually tell myself, okay, look, for 50 strokes here, I'm just going to count 1 to 50. And if at 50, I'm still feeling really anxious and I'm really starting to panic, I'll stop, I'll do breaststroke, I'll roll onto my back, but I'm going to commit to doing those 50 strokes first. And I'm not saying that to be gung-ho or like macho bravado and that type of thing. But again, it goes back to that idea of, okay, can you distract yourself from the sensations around you enough to actually get yourself started? Because getting started is the biggest problem. And again, I'm not suggesting, you jump into 8 degrees Celsius if you've never even been in, anything less than 20 degrees before. Obviously, make sure the facility is safe, that the signs about the temperature and that other people are actually, more importantly, other people are swimming there or swimming with you as well. But, assuming all of those things are okay, then when you jump in there for the first time, just tell yourself, okay, I'm just going to count to 50 here, 50 strokes. And then at that point, I'll reassess how I'm feeling. And that can apply not just to the temperature, but it can apply to anything else you might be freaking out about, the depth of the water or anything like that.
The way it feels when you first get in isn't the way it's going to feel after 3 minutes. That's the one thing, especially here in the UK. I think the first races of the season can be really cold. They can honestly feel like I remember going to Lambert's late, man. There was literally snow still on. There was snow on the mountain still melting down into the lake, and you're thinking, there's no way this water's 12 degrees. And sure enough, you put your face in and you just can't believe you're going to be able to swim in it. But after a couple of minutes, it feels different. So yeah, definitely committing to a short period of time where you're going to keep getting it done, I think, is a really good idea.
Yeah. That's really worked well for me over the years, for sure. And other little tips as well is, I mentioned there the fitting of the wetsuit. One thing which, if you're new to wearing a wetsuit, it's all well and good. We've got a really popular YouTube video about how to put your wetsuit on, so it's worthwhile checking out on. We've got YouTube /@SwimSmooth, and just search for wetsuit fitting. It teaches you how to actually put the wetsuit on properly, get it fitted nicely. But even once you've got that wetsuit on, it's important to start to think about how you're actually going to move your arms in that suit. The classic thing you might have heard or watched on YouTube is that you need to be swimming your freestyle with a nice high elbow over the top of the water. But swimming like that with the tight restriction of the wetsuit around your shoulders can actually fatigue the shoulders even quicker and make you feel even more uncomfortable in the water. So just open out the angle at the elbow a little bit and actually bring your arm more sort of up and over. Even though you might feel a little bit more windmill-like, it can actually take quite a bit of stress and strain off the shoulder, and just feel like you're actually working with the wetsuit as opposed to against the wetsuit.
It's a great tip. Now, what are some key strategies that people can use to stay on course when they're swimming in open water, sighting techniques and things that they can use? Because that's obviously one of the big differences between being in open water and in the pool, is learning the skill of going straight.
Absolutely. One fun exercise, which you might have already tried yourself if you're listening to this, it's the obvious thing to try. You need to be very safe when you're doing this. So find a nice expansive bit of open water, is to actually do those 50 strokes, but with your eyes closed. So it will actually show up immediately. And it's a really fun thing to do with 3 or 4 other mates. You don't all set off together at the same time, but one of you sets off, swims for 50 strokes. The other 2 or 3 mates are there killing themselves laughing as they watch you swim a complete circle because you drift towards your left-hand side or you drift towards your right-hand side or what have you. So that's a fun little exercise to do to see how much you're likely to drift off course. But it's fair to say that of all the tens of thousands of video analysis and stroke correction sessions I've done with people over the last 20 years, if you're going to drift, by and large, if you're breathing primarily to your left-hand side, you will by and large drift more to the left side. If you're breathing more to the right, you'll drift more to the right-hand side. And the reason being is that when you go to take a breath, let's say to the right-hand side, most people at that point, if they're going to do, they'll actually cross over in front of their head with their left hand, and the whole body will take a little bit of a jackknife off towards the right. The same applies towards that left-hand side there as well. So it's really worthwhile bearing that in mind. And it's one of the reasons why I'm such a proponent of bilateral breathing, or at least the ability to be able to breathe to both sides. Because what you find is that on a left-hand turn course, which 8 times out of 10, doing a triathlon or open water event, you will be turning left-hand turn around the buoys. It's a distinct advantage to be able to breathe comfortably and confidently to the left. If you're on a right-hand turn course, somewhere like Kona, for example, or over here in Busselton, they're right-hand turn courses, it's more advantageous to be breathing towards that right-hand side. And the reason being is that if you're going to drift, you're going to be drifting in towards the course as opposed to away from it. But again, that's sort of acknowledging the fact that most people are still going to drift. So to answer your question, Rob, how do you stay straight? Well, one very, very basic exercise, which I get people to do, if I'm teaching them bilateral breathing, I'll get them to count their strokes, but not 1 to 50. I'll get them to simply say to themselves, 1, 2, and then on their breathing stroke, they, rather than actually thinking breathe, they'll actually say to themselves straight. So the rhythm becomes 1, 2, straight, 1, 2, straight. Or if you are breathing unilaterally, it might be 1, straight, 1, straight. Or if you're breathing every 4 strokes, it might be 1, 2, 3, straight, 1, 2, 3, straight. The point here is that you're actually turning off your brain at the point when you go to take a breath in. And well, by what I mean by that, by turning off your brain, is you're stopping thinking about actively breathing and focusing on your lead arm extending straight forward at that point in time, rather than it wrapping around in front of your head and causing you to jackknife off course. And that's a really, really useful tip to do. So whether you breathe every 2, 3, 4, 5 strokes, whatever it might be, make sure that you place a heavy focus on what you're doing when you're breathing and making sure you're thinking about the alignment of that lead arm extending straight forward in front of that same shoulder.
I love that, because we're addressing the issue here of swimming straight without even having talked yet about how to look where you're going. It's almost like the primary issue here isn't whether you can see where you're going. It's what happens when you're not looking where you're going. So that's something I hadn't considered, actually. That's a really interesting point. It's trying to keep people swimming straight as they breathe without even thinking about how they get their eyes out of the water to see where they're going.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, it's really important to have confidence that you can swim straight without actually lifting and sighting. I mean, everybody does need to lift and sight. There's a gadget called the Marlin Platisens, which came out probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was this little GPS device, and it would talk to you whilst you're swimming in the open water. And it would tell you how fast you're swimming, how many strokes per minute you're doing, and those sort of things. But you could also plot a course as well. So let's say you plotted a course from point A to point B. It's 1,500 meters apart. What the live GPS would do is it would tell you if you're drifting off course or not. And it would use like a dial of a clock to sort of suggest that, okay, if you need to go, if you're drifting towards your, let's say your right-hand side, it would actually tell you to come to 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. So you make that slight adjustment, and it'll literally tell you when you're back on course again. Or if you go the other way, it'll be 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And consequently, you end up really, really identifying whether or not you've got a bit of a drift in your stroke, and more importantly, which way you go. These days, I've got something even more simple than that. I've got a mate, Chris, who I swim with on us every Sunday morning. We do 2 or 3 Ks in the open water, and he always sits on my left-hand side because he says, Newsome, you've got a terrible drift to your left-hand side. And, you know, so this is me. I mean, I practice and preach this every single day with thousands of swimmers but I'm just, I'm human as well, right? You know, yeah. So I've still got a bit of a drift in my stroke, and my drift is towards that left-hand side. So he sits on my left-hand side, and I use that. He's dead straight. He is really, really good at being straight. And I just use him as a gauge to make sure I'm not actually drifting off in that direction. And just recently I did the Rottnest Channel swim, and I've been trying for 14 years to break 5 hours on this major international event. There's like 3,500 people do it each year. And it's taken me 14 years to break 5 hours, and I managed to do it this year for the first time. And Chris was actually paddling. Thanks, mate. he was paddling. He was my kayaker, and he said, look, okay, I know exactly where I need to sit. I'm going to sit on your left-hand side, and we're just going to keep you straight. And that's exactly what we did. And I've got a feeling that, you know, there was the weather conditions were fantastic, but I definitely think I swam straighter this year because of that simple bit of work that we've done in the open water together.
Nice. And when people are actually looking up to sight, have you got a favored method for looking up, and have you got a favored how often you should look up per however many strokes?
Well, let's start off with the second question there. How often? How often is really determined by how confident you are in staying straight. So all of what we just talked about in the last few minutes there about your confidence to stay straight really dictates how often you should be sighting in the open water. So if you're somebody who's very, very confident that you can go for 20 strokes and still be quite straight, then, you know, you could actually really limit how often you're lifting your head and looking forwards. Lifting your head and looking forwards is going to slow you down. Basically, the higher you lift your head at the front, the lower the legs sink at the back. And even though you might have a wetsuit on and you might be in the buoyant, salty sea water and stuff, it's still going to have a negative effect. It might also have a negative effect in terms of like neck pain and lower back pain and shoulder pain and all those sort of things as well. So really the short answer there is the more confident you are in keeping straight, the less frequently you'll need to sight. But in terms of my favorite way of doing it, I think the first part of this is really to sort of think to yourself, okay, look, I don't want to be killing two birds with one stone here, which is what a lot of people try and do. They try and sight forwards and breathe forwards at the same time. But doing so, in order to lift your head that high to actually get your mouth out of the water at that point and lift it over the bow wave, again, you're lifting really quite high. So my preferred technique is to make sure that you're actually just sighting, just getting your eyes above the surface of the water. So for example, if I was about to breathe to my right-hand side, I'd have my right hand coming into the water. I'd lightly push down with my right hand, lift my eyes above the water, but not my mouth as well. My left arm would be coming over the top. I'd sight on what I'm looking for, but I wouldn't keep my head up too long. I'd actually still rotate out to the side to breathe to that right-hand side. So it's a little lift and then continue to rotate out to the side. Most people have a bit of a problem with that the first time they try it because they think, I need to keep my head up to see what I can't see. I didn't see it. I didn't see the buoy. What you want to do at that point is just you take a quick snapshot when you sight forwards. And if you don't see what you need to see, you don't panic. You just pop your head back down again, 2 or 3 more strokes, and then you go again and you try it again. And what starts off as a really fuzzy, gray image picture of what you're looking for to sight forwards becomes clearer and clearer. And then once you've got it, you lock it in and you go back to your idea of, okay, 1, 2 straight, 1, 2 straight, to try and keep yourself straight then at that point. So really don't lift your head too high. Don't try and kill 2 birds with 1 stone by sighting and breathing at the same time. Breathe and then continue to rotate out to the side to take a breath in. But really all of that is dictated by your confidence in your natural ability to swim straight.
Brilliant. It all comes back down to that. And so finally, can you tell us a couple of quick specific pool workouts that people could do to practice some open water techniques that's going to help them transfer these skills into open water, please?
Yeah, we do a session over here in Perth where I actively we'll either take out the lane ropes or we'll actually do some snakes in the pool. So let's say we've got 3 lanes in a 50-meter pool, which is, that might sound like a little bit of a luxury, but what I'm going to tell you now is actually more interesting, a lot more fun in a 25-meter pool because it's simply a lot more chaotic than in a 50-meter pool. But, one of the things that we'll do is we'll do like a snake. So we'll swim up 1 lane, underneath the lane rope, down the lane, underneath the lane rope, up the 3rd lane, basically. And rather than all having your own individual lane to swim in, we'll literally start off 15, 20 people in lane 1 together to actually simulate the start of an open water event. And what you do there is you try, as a coach, I'll try to actually put the faster swimmers on the front line, but then encourage the slower swimmers to actually really embrace and feel the drafting benefit that they get as they get sucked along. And you might not be able to stay with the faster swimmers for the entire 150-meter snake, as I've just described it there, but you'll get a bit of a feel for it. You'll also get a bit of a feel for other people swimming around you, the water being a lot more turbulent and chaotic than what you might do, when you're swimming in normal lanes with some nice lane ropes and those type of things. The other thing to do is take the lane ropes out and actually create a little bit of an open water like rectangle within the pool if you've got the whole pool. I've done that many times with clinics and things that I've run over in the UK, and it's a lot of fun. Takes a little bit more organizing, but you can just drop like something very, very basic, like a beach ball on a bit of string with a small weight on the bottom to actually create the 4 buoys. And suddenly you've got like a rectangular course where everyone can practice swimming around and practicing all those other things that we've just been talking about, like the 1, 2 straight and all those sort of things. So yeah, that's a good way of sort of getting accustomed to swimming out there in the open water, especially at the start of a big triathlon event. The other thing I'll throw into that as well is that some courses that you might find yourself on, you might have to do like they call it an Australian exit, where you have to basically exit the water at 1,000 meters, or on a 1,000 meter course, you exit at 500 and then get back into the water. So sometimes we'll get the swimmers to actually climb out and then re-dive back into the next lane, and it just makes it, you know, the heart rate spikes sort of thing, and you feel like, oh my god, the last thing you want to do is get back into the water, but it sort of encourages you back in, and you start to move forwards from there. So yeah, that's another cool thing to do.
Sounds like a lot of fun, really fun workouts. People can, takes a bit of organizing, but it's really good to do something completely different and help prepare for the open water. That sounds great, Paul. Hey, well, listen, thank you very much for your time today. Just before we wrap this up, you mentioned earlier your new YouTube video series. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do for people is over this course of the next 5 weeks, depending on when you're actually listening to this, each week we're actually pushing out a new video in the sequence, basically our stroke correction hierarchy. So that's starting off with breathing. We've only got up to level 2, and it's a bit of a secret to each level, so I'm not going to give the whole thing away right now, but definitely go and check it out. But we did breathing 2 weeks ago, and then last week we were looking at drag reduction, how to actually get your legs sitting up higher in the water if that's something that's holding you back. And the whole idea is to actually take people through literally starting from basics, from the breathing right at the beginning, giving you tips and techniques on what you can do to actually build yourself back up into it. And it's getting a really good response on YouTube. It's nice to sort of like be able to help people see their comments, answer their questions and queries that they might have with it. And it was all basically in response to what I mentioned earlier on about the whole BLACT thing, where I believe, you know, even though that's been industry standard, if you like, for eons, the whole idea of teaching body, legs, arms, breathing, and then timing. I mean, all those things are important, but I would argue that the notion that breathing should be the fourth consideration, especially with everything we've been talking about today with the open water. So yeah, please do go and check it out. It's just at youtube.com/@swimsmooth, and you'll find it from there.
Fantastic stuff. Well, listen, Paul, thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you on. If people want to find out more about Swim Smooth, what's the web address and the socials and things like that?
Cool. Yeah, you can find us, the main website is swimsmooth.com. We've got our online coaching platform at swimsmooth.guru. So we just relaunched him just very recently, and that's all going nicely. And then you can find us on the socials at swimsmooth on Instagram, Facebook, and also YouTube there as well.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much, Rob.